Hi, welcome to Blogging Heads TV. My name is Aryeh Cohen-Wade. I'm the managing editor of Blogging Heads. And today my guest is Dan, who many of you will probably recognize. So Dan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Dan Kaufman. I am a professor of philosophy at Missouri State University and am thankfully no longer the department head. I did my last day when the semester ended, and now somebody else is going to have that wonderful job.
Right, and you are also one of our beloved Blogging Heads commenters under, is it Arabis Tarkina? Is that how you would pronounce it?
Yeah, it's Arabis Tarkina, which is a character from the Chronicles of Narnia from C.S. Lewis's The Horse and His Boy. She's the Calormen girl who accompanies the main character on most of his adventure in that book, and she's one of my favorite characters, and so that's why I chose it.
Okay, cool. So in one of the recent dialogues I recorded with Kristen Capps, we talked about comic books a little bit. So you got in touch with me saying you really wanted to talk about comic books on Blogging Heads. So I thought that would be an interesting conversation, and we'll try to make it accessible for people who are not reading comic books or have never read a comic book. We'll try to keep everything. Remember that people watching this are not comic fans as well. But to begin with, we're going to talk about something that actually does have kind of a comic-related side to it, but is really just a huge news story that has snowballed recently, which is the Sony hack, the cancellation of the movie The Interview, and this whole kind of bizarre story. So Dan, what do you think of this crazy story?
Well, I think a bunch of things about it. I mean, the comic book angle, I guess, was because you drew my attention to a Jonah Goldberg article in National Review.
Right. So we'll talk about that at the end.
Right.
We'll use that as a transition point, but kind of, this I think most people know what this story is about, but in brief, some hackers possibly associated with the country of North Korea hacked into Sony Entertainment's computer systems. They began by revealing embarrassing emails, some of which could possibly have some kind of general, something that the average person might be concerned about. Some were embarrassing in that the executives were joking in kind of a racist way about President Obama, but a lot of stuff that really, so security numbers and things that should not be public, at all, and news organizations were publishing this stuff. And then they started issuing threats, and in a poorly worded, kind of garbled semi-English statement, they threatened another September 11th if the movie The Interview, starring Seth Rogen and James Franco, which is a satirical movie about assassinating Kim Jong-un, was released, and Sony gave in, and they decided to cancel the release. So that's kind of where we are now. And actually, today, we're taping this on Monday the 22nd. It seems like, for some reason, all of North Korea's internet has gone down. And
Right.
it's unclear if this is the U.S., cyber sleuths, or not cyber sleuths, if U.S. government hackers have attacked North Korea in revenge, or if it's, anonymous or independent people who are pissed off about the situation going after North Korea. So we're at the point where we don't really know who launched this counterstrike, but this story is still developing. But what do you think of how this has progressed so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a bad comedy, right? I mean, it's
right.
On the one
and
hand,
a bad comedy is at the center of this.
is the bad comedy is what caused the second bad comedy. I mean, the fact that the whole North Korean internet just collapsed makes you really wonder just how big of a threat they really were to anybody.
Right. And it seems very possible that 3 teenagers in Ohio could have possibly taken down the entire North Korean internet on their own because they were angry about this.
Yes, I mean, you've got this basket case country that I guess the only thing that's really scary about it to anybody internationally is that it has nukes.
Right.
Other than that, I mean, it really is. It's such a basket case of a country that it really doesn't pose much of a threat to anyone other than its own people. And so, the question then is, okay, well then why did Sony, sort of buckle and cave so quickly and so
Right.
totally? It further mystified me. I mean, look, the Social Security numbers and things like that obviously is very serious in terms of breaches, but I mean, that happens all the time. I mean,
Right.
I mean, Target gets hacked, and all of a sudden, 500,000 people's credit card numbers are available. Hold on one second. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Um, I had the phone in my room because you and I were talking, and now I couldn't get rid of it.
That's okay.
But the other stuff that got leaked, what is it? I mean, so we found out that some execs at a major company are jerks. I mean, that's not news.
Yeah, I think I made a joke I made a joke on Twitter, which was, I'm shocked that Hollywood executives are secretly horrible people.
Right.
Like, everyone knows that the stereotype of a Hollywood movie executive is like, the worst person possible.
Right.
These are obviously embarrassing to have this publicly printed, that you were making semi-racist jokes about President Obama and all the other stuff that came out. That's private email leaked is obviously very embarrassing, and for an industry that is like mostly about image, these kind of things can be very damaging.
Yeah, well, yes, I guess damaging in a certain way, but why? That's not a reason to pull the movie, and that's right. I mean, you pull the movie and you don't show, you pull it out of theaters because you're really afraid something's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You don't pull the movie because somebody leaked the fact that you said mean things about Angelina Jolie.
Right.
And so it seems to me that they pulled this stuff because they actually thought there was some real credible threat from North Korea that they were going to blow up movie theaters.
Right, which seems absurd and insane, to believe that could actually happen, considering.
Yeah.
An attack, Al Qaeda wants to launch attacks within the United States, and they've never done anything. They never attacked a movie theater, which is kind of a sitting target, as was sadly shown in the case in Colorado a couple of years ago, where, a deranged person with a machine gun killed people at a comic book movie. It was the third Batman movie in the Christopher Nolan series, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was.
So, a deranged person or a committed terrorist could attack a movie theater and slaughter people, but that hasn't happened.
And not North Koreans. I mean, I don't know. The whole thing struck me as ridiculous. And in terms just simply of the embarrassment and the reputation, you and I just were talking about this on the phone. I mean, the nature of these things now is that nobody remembers anything for more than a week or two.
Right.
And so, if you just had done nothing and said nothing and waited, the whole thing would have blown over. I pointed out to you that, right now we're in the middle of this Bill Cosby ridiculousness going on. Does anybody even remember that 8 months ago it was Woody Allen? That everybody had dredged this old story up, and everybody was piling on Woody Allen, and you went on Gawker, and you went on Vice, and everybody was trashing him, and he's a rapist, and he should go to prison, and all that. And then now everybody forgot it, right? And it's over. And the guy can go back about his business, I guess, to whatever degree he can. And I suspect if Bill Cosby did the same thing, in 6 months nobody would remember this either.
Right.
This is part of a consequence of, it strikes me, a media cycle which has to be filled 24/7, in which there's thousands of outlets, and thus most of what's said is rubbish, right? Most of it's rubbish,
right?
And the scandal mongering and all sorts of stuff like that. And I guess I find Sony's reaction mystifying on so many levels, and I guess it sort of makes you also sort of wonder about the sort of people that run these companies. I think we tend to think of CEOs of major corporations as very serious people, but you start wondering almost if this is the sort of thing where the good fortune of this position sort of fell on their heads, right?
Right.
Because I couldn't even imagine, the janitor reacting like this, let alone.
Okay, well, I have a couple things that I think explain Sony's behavior. Okay,
sure.
The first one is that the hackers. It's interesting to kind of speculate who these hackers are. I mean, North Korea is such a closed country and these people speak, some form of English. It seems like maybe they're linked up with Chinese nationals. Anyway, they understand something about modern American media, which is that a story lives with new details released every day. So they were releasing new stuff, as far as I understand at least. They were releasing new emails every day from the internal Sony email system. So there was a new story to write at Vulture and Gawker and all these other sites every single day. That's how the story stays alive in the modern media, is if there's something new to talk about every single day.
Right.
And when we're talking about outrage, you made some great points, and Slate actually just has this whole long series that I haven't read yet, but I'm going to, about outrage and how 2014 was the year of outrage, and they figured out for every calendar day of the year what the outrageous thing was, and we're having people vote on whether or not it was actually an outrage. So there's an outrage industry, and it drives clicks online, and things that things that make some small group of people angry get blown up in the online world because there's an incentive for sites like Gawker and all these other sites and Huffington Post and whatever to do a new article about them if they know that it could catch fire on Twitter and they could get a sudden stream of traffic from people who don't usually read them. So that's what the hackers kind of understood, and possibly that's accidental. Possibly they're cannier than we think the North Koreans usually are. So the other thing that explaining the kind of the Sony's reaction to this, I think there's a famous quote that I knew before and I just looked up the details to before this call. So maybe you've heard this. It's the quote about Hollywood. Nobody knows anything. Have you ever heard this?
No, I don't think I've heard that one.
Okay, so it's William Goldman, who is a screenwriter. He wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid,
Sure.
All the President's Men and Princess Bride, and like 20 other movies. So he wrote a book about Hollywood, and he famously said nobody knows anything. So what that means is that there's no way to predict whether a movie is going to be successful or not. The smartest people in the world could come together and open a movie studio, and they could not consistently produce hits. There's just something totally unpredictable. They could spend $200 million on a movie, and it can make $20 million. They can spend $20 million on a movie, and it can make $200 million. There's no formula. It's just something, some things are good, some things are bad. A movie is so complicated that there's no way to reliably predict what is actually going to work or not. And this ties into our larger conversation about comic book movies, which is the dominant form of blockbuster movie making now, which we'll get to later. But anyway, so if you're a Hollywood studio executive, you are basically, your job performance is not necessarily related to expected outcomes. You could be the best Hollywood studio executive, but you can't actually predict what's going to hit and what's not going to. So your job is always uncertain, and the industry is ruled by fear because there's no logical connection between amount of money spent, effort put in to making a new movie, and how much money it makes in the end, or how successful it is. Great directors, great actors and great writers make shitty movies all the time. I just saw Interstellar this weekend. Christopher Nolan, genius. McConaughey, great actor. Anne Hathaway, great actor. It was one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life. My wife and I were just, the whole ride home, we spent about 45 minutes describing every single plot hole and stupidity in this movie, and I've liked every other Christopher Nolan movie I made. So nobody knows anything. Nobody knows what's going to work or not. So when the studio executives start being under pressure because their personal emails are being leaked, they're made to look like fools, their salaries are published, and then suddenly someone says, oh, and we're going to kill a bunch of people because of the movie you made, like, their panic is totally understandable because, they already exist in this ecosystem where, what they do and what happens and the ultimate, economic output has, like, no connection to each other. So they're already freaked. They're like, lab rats or something that are being shocked at intermittent intervals. So they just panicked, and they did this thing that everyone agrees is really stupid, but it kind of makes sense when you think about it from their perspective.
Well, but let me push you on two things on this. I mean, first of all, the no one knows anything. Is that actually true, or is that no one knows anything because of the way that Hollywood goes about doing research and making predictions? I mean, look, if you were talking about the advertising industry, you wouldn't say that nobody knows anything. And the reason why people know something in the advertising industry is because these corporations employ psychologists who spend all of their time trying to figure out how to make people want things. Right. And it's extraordinarily successful. And that industry goes back to the days of Edward Bernays, and the application of scientific psychology to the selling of products and to marketing. I'm not at all sure that it may just be that Hollywood has an incredibly stupid and ignorant way of going about determining what to make.
Okay, I think you may be right, but I mean, think about how much more complicated a 2-hour movie is than a 30-second ad. I mean, obviously Christopher Nolan is a cinematic genius, and yet probably $200 million were spent on this movie, paying the actors and the special effects. It looked incredible. The special effects were incredible. And yet this movie is a total disaster. I don't know. It had 70% or so on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know how anyone could have liked this thing. It was just a total turkey. It made no internal, external sense. So, Christopher Nolan has this great track record The Batman movies, which are all pretty good. Some people don't like them.
I hated them.
Okay, well, we can get into that later. Anyway, Christopher Nolan is at least an economically successful director. His movies are all blockbusters. The comic book movies he makes are blockbusters, and like the movies which are high concept but have great actors in them. Like the one with DiCaprio, whose name I can't recall right now. The last non-Batman movie he made before Interstellar. That was a really good movie. And yet,
was it? I know what it was. It was the one with the dreams, right?
Yeah,
Something with an I. I'm now forgetting the name of it. The movie starts with an I, though.
Yeah, it's slipping my mind as well. But
yeah.
So that was high concept.
Inception.
Yeah, of course.
Inception. Yeah.
So that
was a mess too, by the way.
Oh, I like. Okay, if you thought
it
that
was very good. It was very good, but it was bloody. I mean, I doubt it was actually decipherable.
Right. Okay. So obviously there's some of the people who work in Hollywood are idiots, but a lot of them are very smart. And no one, if you assembled all the smartest people in the world and had them say, okay, make a great movie, you're not going to get a great movie necessarily. There's some weird alchemy that happens when you're making a movie, and it seems super complicated to even make a movie. These things, they cost hundreds of millions of dollars and they're marketed for hundreds of millions of dollars, and half of them are just awful. So
yeah. Well, look, I mean, we could get into a lot of details about this. I don't want to derail us from the Sony story.
Okay, so why don't we make the comic book connection? So actually, Jonah Goldberg, whose work I do not usually recommend, actually had a really interesting piece about the Sony hack, and he connected it to the first issue of Captain America, which was published in 1940, so right. Almost 75 years ago. And this is an iconic comic book, and it was the first, it was when Captain America was created. And on the cover, we'll link to an image of the cover. It's Captain America punching Hitler in the face.
That's right.
So it's this instantly iconic thing, Captain America in his red, white, and blue outfit, and the shield. It's actually a different shield than the original round shield. It looks more like a regular shield, and he's punching Hitler right in the face. And Jonah notes that this was published in 1940, before the United States entered World War II. So, and he kind of talks about what happened to the creators of Captain America, who were Jack Kirby and Schuster. Is that right?
Yes. And it was pre-Marvel. So Marvel.
Right.
Marvel. Your dog's getting excited. Marvel Comics doesn't start till 1960.
Yeah, I think it was called Timely or something like that.
Yeah, this was a predecessor company.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is that in that case, the comic makers got real threats, not threats of we're going to leak some embarrassing letter you wrote, or some completely unbelievable threat of we're going to blow up your building, but real threats of sending hoodlums to stand outside the building and wait for them when they came out.
Yeah, there was this organization called the Bund or the Bund?
The American-German Bund,
right.
which was the sort of the pro-appeasement, pro-Nazi group, because you have to remember that there was a substantial isolationist movement in the United States.
And a number of German Americans living in the United States who maybe were not openly sympathetic with Hitler, or at least didn't want another war against Germany.
That's right. And so, Goldberg's point is a fair one, and that is, arguably, there was a much greater risk in what the Captain America comic did.
Right.
First of all, Nazi Germany was a far more formidable opponent than the basket case country North Korea.
Yes.
And number two, the threats could realistically be carried out.
Right, and we should note that both Kirby and Schuster were Jewish.
That's right.
And there's an interesting kind of historical subplot about why so many of the early comic book creators were Jewish. The two, Siegel and the other guy who created Superman, were both Jewish.
That's right.
That was in 1939. Stan Lee is Jewish. His actual name is Stanley Lieber, I believe. Kirby is Jewish. And and there's a Michael Chabon book called The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay that's set in this world. And this is where I get all this information. So it's fictionalized, but I think it actually is true that the advertising industry, which is where these people kind of naturally would have ended up, illustrators and writers, was closed off to Jews, basically. And I don't know if you watch Mad Men, but in the first season they have a plot where there's a Jewish department store owner who who hires Sterling Cooper to do a campaign for them, and they realize they don't have a single Jew, in the creative team, so they find some guy, a Jewish guy who works in the mailroom, and bring him up and have him sit in on the meeting so that, Sammy Goldstein can shake the hand, although he really doesn't know what the hell is going on, and they usher him out when, it becomes kind of clear that he actually, is just works in the mailroom. So that's the reason that all the great the Golden and Silver Age comic book creators, a lot of them were Jewish, was because they were shut out of the advertising industry by anti-Semitism.
And there's also sort of a natural, there's certainly the Superman story. There's an immigrant story dimension to it that has been widely. I mean, this is not something I've discovered. Right. I mean, this is widely recognized. There's an interesting way in which the Jews in 20th century America really tapped into Americana in a way that I'm not sure as many of the other ethnic minorities did.
Right, they wanted to make themselves seem more American than Americans.
Yeah, I mean, who loves baseball? Who loved baseball more than Jewish people in the mid 20th century, right?
Right.
I mean, you read Brighton Beach memoirs, right?
If you read Philip Roth's autobiography and also his fictionalized autobiographical novel, The Plot Against America, which imagines, which uses him and his real family, but is set in an alternate reality where Charles Lindbergh wins the presidency instead of FDR, and a kind of a fascism comes to take over America. He talks about how much, how proud he was of America as a youth, and we can talk about Irving Berlin, who wrote White Christmas, which my wife and I just actually watched the other day. And of course, White Christmas is kind of the classic Christmas song, but it doesn't really have a lot to do with Christmas, and it's also written by someone who's Jewish. So, and a lot of musicians from this era were Jewish as well.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of a disreputable, in a way, like the Tin Pan Alley era was disreputable, in the same way comic books were disreputable.
Yeah.
They were locked out of, I don't know, being like conducting in this a symphony or playing in an orchestra or something, but they kind of made their own way and really created a lot of the 20th century pop culture that came to rule the world in a way.
That's absolutely correct. The other remarkable thing about that I thought was notable about what Jonah Goldberg observed in this comparing this episode with Sony with the publishing of the first Captain America was the reaction of the government.
Right.
And so back in 1940, then Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia told everyone involved, "We'll protect you. You go on doing what you're doing. We're not going to let anybody hurt you."
Right.
Whereas today, certainly Obama said nothing of the sort, gave no such reassurances. He just made some weak sort of remark about, people should go to the movies or something like that.
Right. And, well, I mean,
there really is kind of we just look pitiful across the board, right? I mean, the whole thing is pitiful looking. And,
I mean, so there's obvious differences. I mean, the differences are that, the movie theater threat was a dispersed threat to the 20,000 movie theaters across the country. Obama could not say, yes, we're going to protect every single movie theater. That would be insane. And of course, the threat was a lot less realistic. But the other difference is that Sony is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. It actually is a Japanese corporation, not an American one. And of course, North Korea Japan is a greater enemy of North Korea than America is. So that's possibly one of the reasons that the hackers targeted Sony to begin with. But the other difference that Jonah did not point out between Timely Comics or whatever that the proto Marvel was and Sony is that Timely Comics was just probably like a mom and pop operation more or less.
Yes,
and they could take a lot more risks than Sony, who multi-billion-dollar international company who was super skittish about everything and plays it safe all the time for economic reasons.
Yeah, look, I mean, the analogy is obviously imperfect. Obviously, we could come up with a million reasons, why Obama couldn't have said something like Fiorello LaGuardia said. Mm-hmm. But there's also, of course, another reason, and that's Obama ain't no Fiorello LaGuardia. I mean, he tends to be kind of Weasley and mealy-mouthed and But it's not just him. I mean, it's almost the demand of how politicians talk today. It's very rare that you get a very blunt sort of straight. That's why I think part of the reason why I think everybody found Ross Perot, at least for 5 minutes, so refreshing, was that he didn't talk all this bullshit that these guys talk, and he didn't meander and he didn't circumlocute. He went straight at it, and so. I think it does, for all the differences that you've mentioned, which are of course correct. I do also think it's because the very sort of character of contemporary politicians isn't like it was in 1940.
Right, and I think we can relate this back to what we were saying at the beginning, because if Fiorello LaGuardia said something intemperate, maybe it got printed in the New York papers and people forgot about it after a week. If Bill de Blasio said something intemperate, everyone in the world can know about it instantly. Right. And if Obama, Obama even more so. And Obama is really, I think, his main character trait is he's cautious, and he doesn't strike while the iron is hot necessarily. So he actually had a pretty forceful statement in the press conference a couple days after Sony pulled the movie. I thought that was, he said this was a mistake basically, and he thought it was the wrong decision. Yeah, but he is never going to be the one who, 2 hours after something like this happens, he's going to be out with a forceful statement. Like, that's just not who he is. Yeah, and he's never operated that way. And a lot of liberals get angry with him because of that, and they want these really forceful statements after, the Michael Brown verdict came out. They want him to carry the banner, and that's just not who he is temperamentally, and that's not what he can't do that because he's the president of the entire country. Yeah, no, and I'm not really criticizing Obama all that much about this. I mean, I have plenty of problems with him. I generally am a critic of his from the left, not from the right. Right. But this situation, what was he really going to do in any event? Once Sony had sort of made all these decisions. Since I'm sure probably 95% of Americans think that Sony made the wrong decision coming out right now is not a profile in courage. But there's one other thing I want to mention in connection with this before we move on to talking about comic books, is that there was a really interesting article that was published in Fast Company about what Sony should do. So have you heard of BitTorrent? Yes, of course. Okay, so you have, I have, but for people who haven't, BitTorrent is kind of like the 10th generation of what Napster created. So it's a way to download files using a distributed network. So everyone is sharing little bits of the file, and as soon as someone posts a torrent, people start downloading it, and then it's basically immortal because everyone has the full thing or a part of it, and you download it from different sources. So if something is torrent, so a lot of what BitTorrent is used for is pirated movies and pirated TV shows. So it's kind of like the enemy number one of the entertainment industry in Hollywood. But they made the case that Sony should just post the interview on BitTorrent, and BitTorrent is trying to legitimize itself and has a way that it's mostly musicians now charge like $5 to download the torrent, and then you download the file very quickly. So I think this author suggests charge $5 or $10 for the download, donate $5 from every purchase to Ebola relief, and suddenly the whole paradigm has changed. The people who are would usually download this movie illegally are paying for it, and the money's going to Ebola, which is fighting Ebola, which is a good thing. And it kind of and Sony is teamed up with the people who are usually pirating movies against North Korea. So I don't know if this will happen. I don't think the people at Sony are smart enough to realize this would be a really great PR move and substantive move. But if it does happen, I think it could be a game changer for how movies are distributed. Yeah, except that once one person downloads it through BitTorrent by paying for it, he's just going to put it on BitTorrent for free. That's true. And everybody's going to steal it again. But if you can play to people's patriotism and charity by saying half the proceeds are going to go to Ebola, and don't you want to strike a blow against Kim Jong-un, who didn't want you to see this movie, there's a chance that they could actually make some money off of it. I don't know. I suspect that the crowd who does BitTorrent illegal downloads is about the same crowd is about the same as the 4chan crowd, and I suspect that their appeals to their patriotism are probably not going to are not going to move them very much. That's true, but it would be a way to legitimize BitTorrent as well. It would be if you
Sure,
do want to see the
sure,
interview, how do you do it? You have to download BitTorrent, so it
sure,
helps
sure,
BitTorrent and
sure.
so
And after the big takedown of the Pirate Bay, which was the main place where people were going and stealing stuff via
mhm.
via BitTorrent, I do think that certainly something like this could rehabilitate the reputation of the process a little bit.
Yeah.
But I don't know. This on this business with pirating and stealing and entertainment companies and everything. I actually have a pretty radical view of this. I don't think that the current model of the business model of these companies is viable anymore,
Hmm.
and I'm not sure that we're going to have that any of these companies are going to exist in 20 years. So I mean, you're seeing it happening in the music industry,
Right. That's interesting.
and so I think that we're in a sort of an in between stage now, and that what the whole industry is going to look like in 20 years is going to be unrecognizable
Hmm.
to what it is now, just simply because once people can steal, they're going to steal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that's just the way this is now, and I don't see any way to stop them from stealing it, no matter what new technology you introduce. I'm sorry, the 4chan guys are smarter than you are. They just are, and they're going to
Right.
figure out a way to steal it,
Right.
And
I mean, so the difference is, and this kind of plays into also why superhero movies are become so prevalent, and there's 5
yes,
different superhero movies released every year. Is that um, seeing a movie, the one thing that stealing a movie from using BitTorrent can't do is put you in a movie theater with a great sound system and the screen is 100 feet high. That is an aesthetic experience that is still unique. So people have home theaters that are a lot better than they used to be, and giant TVs are cheaper than they used to be. But seeing a movie on the big screen is still a unique experience. So, as I said in a recent dialogue, I live in Rochester, New York, and George Eastman, the founder of Eastman Kodak, his house his mansion was turned into a museum of photography and film, and there's a theater attached to it called the Dryden that every day shows a movie. Most of them are old movies. Sometimes we get new releases, art films that wouldn't usually come to Rochester. But they do different series, and it's a really great resource. And if anyone is ever visiting Rochester, New York, you should definitely go to the George Eastman House. But so I've had the chance over the past couple of years to see some classics of cinema on the big screen, Psycho, Rear Window. But the one that was really the most emotionally affecting was E.T. Have you ever seen E.T. on the big screen?
yes, of course. I mean, I was a kid in the
Okay,
'70s and
so
early '80s, so
okay, so I was too young to see
yeah,
E.T. on the big screen when it came out. I saw it on a VHS tape a lot when I was a kid, but seeing it as an adult on the big screen, it was emotionally affecting. I was like close to tears at the end of
yeah,
E.T., which I had seen 20 times before. But the big screen is different. There's something about it. The music, the John Williams score at the end, it was really an incredible experience.
yeah,
So if you ever have a chance to see E.T. on the big screen, I definitely recommend it. But again, that's something that the hackers can't steal, that big screen
right.
experience. And so I think that's why possibly what happened to the music industry isn't going to happen to the movie industry, at least in the same way.
Well, not to as much of a degree, but you're right. I mean, but to a certain degree, I think it will.